Welcome to week 6 of our Lent study course based upon this book, Saying Yes to Life by Ruth Valerio. And in the course of the last few weeks we've been looking at different parts of the opening chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, using different verses to help us think about the different aspects of our responsibility as humans to care for the creation that God has given us to be stewards of, to be caretakers. And in this week 6 we're going to look at the chapter 1 verses 24 to 31 of Genesis chapter 1. In those verses we'll think about how God makes land-based animals and humans, and also therefore how we take care of those animals and of other humans too. One of the things that Ruth Valerio points out to us as we read through the book is a phrase in verse 30 of chapter 1 of Genesis, and she talks about where the word that are translated breath of life, how in other versions of the Bible that phrase breath of life is also translated as soul. And she highlights therefore that the breath of life which is breathed into both humans and animals means that God wants the animals that are being created to be treated with respect and dignity. Often humans have been elevated to the point where animals then take a very poor second place. But she points out here that therefore there is a real sense in which animals have a soul. Not that they're the same as humans, but that certainly they have a capacity for emotions which other creatures less so is the case. So how does that affect our actions towards animals, she asks. Ongoing thoughts from those verses include therefore our care for animals, both wild and domestic. Caring for wild animals, we'll be thinking about the habitats they have, their biodiversity. Are they going to be able to continue and thrive as climate change continues? And if we're thinking about domestic animals, those things that we used in farming, how do we care for them well? What is good animal husbandry like in this age? Certainly, if you're like me, someone who eats meat, that brings up issues to do with not only how animals live, but how they die also. And issues of factory farming become part of the conversation that we need to have there as well. It's interesting that Ruth points out in the book that the most populous bird in the world now is the farmed chicken. The sort of food we have and how it's produced and how it's eaten is a theme which comes out in this chapter of Ruth's book. And she highlights to us what she calls 5 questions about how to eat in a holy way. The questions are these, and I invite you to think about them. Firstly, why am I eating? Am I eating because I need the food and I'm hungry? Or am I eating because I'm a bit bored? Or maybe it's because I've got an emotional need, I feel a bit low, and the eating will help me to feel better. Secondly, how fast do I eat my food? Do I shovel it down in a hurry, or do I have time to savour it and give thanks to God for it? Thirdly, where do I eat? Am I going to be sort of sitting in front of the telly, watching it as a sort of TV snack, or might I eat better or in a better way if I were to sit down separately at a table perhaps and be able to savour and give thanks to God for the food that I'm enjoying? Fourthly, she says, with whom do I eat my food? Many of us will eat alone, and she points out that actually eating together is a good and healthy thing to do. So many of the times in the Bible where Jesus meets with people, it's around a meal, and special things happen when he does that. So this idea of table fellowship is an important one, and it means that when we eat with other people, we share hospitality, again, which is commended in the Bible to us all. And fifthly, she asks the question, where has my food come from? And that opens up a whole range of issues, like the carbon footprint that might be associated with the food that we're eating. Eating food out of season probably means it's been shipped in by a longer route. There might be air miles associated with it, which we could do with avoiding really. And then there's issues to do with land and animal care. How have the animals that I'm eating, if I'm eating meat, how have they lived and how have they died? Have they been well cared for? And if it's vegetation or if fruit and vegetables I'm eating, has the land that's been used to produce that food been cared for well? Or has it been treated intensively with lots of chemicals, which will have an effect of flowing off into the rivers and therefore into the seas as well, and adding to pollution? So you can perhaps see that food becomes quite an important issue as we think about our care for God's creation. And Ruth, in the course of towards the end of that chapter 6 in her book, she commends to us the possibility of a low meat or no meat diet. And that isn't something that everyone can do, but it's certainly something that we can think about as we try and respond to these issues of how we care for God's creation as the people who've been given this job of being caretakers. Lastly, we come to humans. Humans are the only part of God's creation which we're told are made in the image of God. And Ruth Valeria in the book tries to ponder, well, what might this phrase, made in the image of God, mean? And after a number of discussions in the book, she talks about the possibility of it meaning that we are representatives of God in his world, in his creation. You might remember that one of the commandments is that the Israelite community are told not to have any graven image of God. That's one of the things they're commanded to not do, to not make an image of God. And part of the logic is there that actually there is already an image of God in the creation. You and me and our fellow humans. Ruth says that therefore if we're representatives of God, we're a bit like his ambassadors, standing in for God, if you like, in being custodians and carers for his creation. And so if that's the case, that does affect the way that we treat all of the creation that God has made and given us responsibility for. And in particular, I guess, it affects how we treat other humans, how we treat these other representatives of God. It brings up issues of fairness, of race, of gender, of wealth and poverty, of inclusion and sexuality. All of these things become very live issues and are a right part of our reflections as we think about these verses from Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 to 31. And lastly, at the end of all this, at the end of this sixth episode of creation, we see that for the first time, God declares that what he has made is very good. In all the other days, God declares it's good. But in the sixth day, we're told it is very good. And that suggests to me that the whole of the creation altogether has an interdependence which God commends to us. And it's not just that we're to look after humans only and forget all the other parts, that the whole creation altogether is very good. And therefore we, as representatives, caretakers, have a job to keep it and help it to remain very good. The discussion questions and other videos that we'll watch will help us to think about that some more deeply. And I hope that even beyond Lent, we'll have a good think about our response to the issues that have come up in Ruth Valeria's book, Saying Yes to Life. Thank you for being involved in the course so far, and please let's continue the conversations as we roll on through 2020.
How are Anglican churches around the world preparing for the increasing impacts of climate change that are going to be suffered and experienced?
It's a really good question. If I was to give you a full answer, we'd be here till midnight. There is a global study and work and organisation led by the Archbishop of Southern Africa, Thabo Makgoba, and in England by the Bishop of Salisbury, Bishop Nick Holtham, which is about understanding the issues, understanding how it affects the poorest, and through the Anglican Alliance seeking to mitigate effects and help them. And then one of the areas we've got to develop a lot more is using the extraordinary distribution network of the Anglican Communion to help with the development and distribution of simple, low-cost, renewable sources of energy.
One of the themes that runs through the whole of Saying Yes to Life and comes out particularly in chapter 6 is our interconnectedness as humans, as people, with the wider natural world. and particularly in chapter 6 with other created beings. I say towards the beginning of the chapter that we have been created to be in communion with other beings, and where we don't have that, then we are the poorer for it. Is that something that you can relate to personally?
Oh, obviously. I can't begin to get my mind round the idea of a human being as a sort of self-standing entity, independent, autonomous from their context, their environmental, their context, as well as other contexts. I suppose it's just possible to imagine, but what you're effectively saying is that we could live in an unpainted concrete room and would find deep inner satisfaction from goodness knows what, each other's company. You only have to go out, even in the great urban areas, in different weathers, and to recognize our connected, not just our vulnerability to climate, but even more so our joy and celebration of the climate of the world that God has given us, the blue sky, the clouds, the birds, the freshness of an evening after a hot day, the stillness of a night, or the stars, whatever it happens to be. We are human much more so because we are interconnected. Our humanity is profoundly diminished without that interconnection.
Yeah.
And also our mental health, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. And are there, as you talk about that, are there particular places or particular experiences for you that come to mind that you've drawn on?
Yes, I mean, it's places like the White Cliffs down above Dover.
Yeah.
Whether on a foggy day when you can't see anything, or on a beautiful day when you can see the coast of France in the distance. That sense of human activity, the business of ships going up and down the channel, combined with that sense of just extraordinary beauty of the sea and the cliffs and the downs. That's one of my favourite places. There's others. The North Norfolk coast is another one. The Ruwenzori in Uganda. Lake Edward in North Kivu. I mean, I go on and on and on. I mean, just amazing.
Lovely. And sometimes what you said about maybe we could live in a concrete
box.
Box with no recourse to the wider natural world. I wonder if sometimes we read our Bibles like that, and in the sense that one of the things I've appreciated so much through writing Saying Yes to Life is the fresh discovery of how much all the different aspects, light, water, land, trees, other creatures, the Bible is just full of them, and particularly other creatures. We are accompanied by other creatures all the way through the Bible, and they play an integral part of the redemption story, and yet we tend to read the Bible as if it's only about people. Is that something you struggle with, or how can we broaden our
Well, it's very
reading
easy.
of the Bible?
You're right, we can create a sort of box around us when reading the scriptures, rather than sitting back, pausing, as you would when eating something absolutely delicious. You don't just bolt it. You pause and let yourself think about it as you read the scripture. You look at the world around you, you look at those with you, you reflect inwardly on the natural world, and you see what Jesus is saying. Or you're reading the Gospels and he's talking about the sower, and you picture in your mind the fruitfulness of the ground and what he's talking, the rocky ground, and so on. It the Bible, there are so many reasons that the scriptures, that the Bible is so special. One of the most wonderful ones is it engages us with the natural world so intensely. It's as though God were saying, pay attention not only to what I'm saying, to what I'm doing around you, to the lavishness of the creation, the extraordinary, ridiculous, absurd extravagance of what God has made, and allow yourself to let the joy of that fill your heart.
Chapter 6, exploring the creation of living beings and living creatures and humans, obviously spends a lot of time looking at what it means to be made in the image of God. Could you share with us your understanding of that phrase and what it means to you?
To be in the image of God.
Yeah.
I think what it means is that there is, and I think this is a biblical principle, that there is in the whole of creation something that witnesses to the reality of God. And in us, there is something that witnesses to the reality of God, which is constrained in us and misshapen the more we turn in on ourselves and become fascinated by ourselves and not outwards towards God, and is liberated when we look at God. There is that seed, that spark, that light, which we can increasingly snuff out, or which we can allow to burn up brightly.
Lovely. Justin, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ruth, very, very much.
Thank you.